What are your school's policies that relate to an individual's right to appeal to the board? And what are your responsibilities as a trustee to ensure that appropriate processes are in place? In many international schools, one of the roles of the board is to manage appeals. These appeals are issues that have been dealt with in the school and decisions have been reached, and maybe they're not been welcomed. And so they tend to fall into two categories. First are the employee grievances, where a member of staff feels aggrieved by a decision taken within the school, typically related to contractual disputes or non-renewal of contracts or even dismissal from employment. The second relates to parents seeking appeals of the head of school's decisions, typically relating to student discipline or suspension or even expulsion. The appeal process is usually the last internal step, leaving the only other avenue or recourse is through external arbitration or the law courts. It's important for the board to agree the principles of the appeals process and to have clearly documented the detailed arrangements that can be reviewed by the school's lawyer. This is best done at a time when there are no appeals in the pipeline, so that the issues can be explored without having the hanging pressure of an impending case. I'm going to expand on some of the issues that you need to factor in, but really you need to engage a lawyer to ensure that there are no country-specific aspects or cases of precedents that may impact your legal standing if at any time in the process the situation was challenged in a court. Perhaps the first principle, like any established legal system, is you can't be judge and jury at the same time. And so the people involved in making a decision can't be the same people listening to an appeal. This is one of the reasons why a trustee shouldn't be involved with a grievance against the school and should instead ensure that it's managed according to agreed protocols by the leadership or administration within the school. A similar principle holds for internal investigations in the school, where the head of school shouldn't be directly involved in the investigation phase. The only way to stay impartial, or at least attempt to be seen as being impartial, is to entrust appropriate staff to conduct the investigatory phases and for the head of school to make a reasonable judgment based on the evidence provided. So typically an appeal that reaches the board level is an appeal against the head of school's decision. And this is where the board needs to tread lightly, for there are potholes in the road of good intention. Let me illustrate some of the complexities with some small vignettes. Imagine the situation where John, a popular mathematics teacher, has been told by the head of school that his contract won't be renewed at the end of the year. Now, John has been active speaking to his colleagues and even some parents about his grievance with the decision of the head of school and has lodged an appeal to the board. At this stage, you'd want to be sure what procedures are in place for dealing with this type of issue and the criteria for offering or not a new contract. If you go ahead and listen to the appeal, then you may be asking, how qualified are you to make a judgment about a teacher's performance in the classroom? While the teacher may be popular, popularity isn't the same as effectiveness. And of course, there may be any number of other hidden factors that lie behind the head's decision of non-renewal. What if the teacher frequently refuses to follow established procedures, or frequently fails to meet deadlines or standards of administrative work? What if the teacher's been counselled about his overly casual attention to certain students or his lack of commitment to make good on promises made? There are undoubtedly so many aspects that make up his performance management that may be sensitive, confidential, and even dynamite if taken out of context. The point is that an appeal may result in some type of further investigation, and as a board you need to be very aware of the complexities and how these can become, and your role and your commitment. Alternatively, perhaps the board listens to the appeal. What if it overturns the head's decision? What does that say? And let's say that even though you don't have the full insight that the head does, you overturn the decision. That's effectively a vote of no confidence in the head. And before you know it, that rapport between the board and the head of school, you'll see that crumbling. And where will that lead? So if you listen to an appeal, be clear about the basis for the appeal. Are you focusing on the procedures to ensure that the proper steps were taken? Or are you looking at something else? So again, let's look at a situation where a particularly popular student from a well-to-do family was caught bringing alcohol into a school function or on a school trip. And that leads to the head of school suspending the child, and now the parent is demanding an appeal from the board. Now, there may be any number of technicalities that could seem to give the parent appeal some legitimacy, whether, let's say that the information sent to pupils didn't specifically say that alcohol was forbidden, or some other trivial loophole that a legally minded parent may be able to find. While the principles of natural justice apply within the school, it doesn't mean that the school has to be run like a law court. Does the teacher, for example, have to read a child his rights before asking why he hasn't done his homework? What if the child demands to take the Fifth Amendment before demanding his lawyer? That's ridiculous. The school has to operate within the bounds of the law, yes, but it's guided by its philosophies and that establish the ethos within the school. Having clearly articulated statements, either through the initial application for parents or an annual declaration, will certainly help. On the case of our alcohol-curious teenager, what exactly is the appeal that the board is hearing? Is it the process by which the case was handled, or is it appealing against a policy that was actually set by the board? What message does that send if the board overturns a decision based on its own policies? Again, what would be the message to the head of school if the decision was overturned? How would the board deal with the pressure from parents who support the decision? On the other hand, what kind of fallout will there be from the rest of the community if it's learned that the decision was overturned and that the board actually, supports the ideas of students bringing alcohol into the school? No, it doesn't mean that the board simply endorses every decision made by the head of school, because there does need to be accountability. But the board does need to be very, very clear on exactly what's being reviewed. So some details in the policy and procedures for dealing with appeals that you may wish to factor into your thinking might include, first off, do you entertain appeals that haven't followed the agreed procedures? What are the levels of grievance procedures so that disputes can be dealt with at the lowest level before being escalated up to the board level? Is the appeal actually sufficiently serious that it merits a board appeal in the first place? Just because some staff wanted the staff room painted blue instead of beige, or a parent wants to appeal the head's decision not to allow KFC to be delivered every lunchtime, maybe it still doesn't merit a board appeal. Similar to the seriousness of the appeal, are there aspects that you simply want to take off the table when it comes to the grievance procedure? So, for example, teacher appraisal or appeals against decisions regarding personal leave days. Fifth, what is the process for registering an appeal? Who gets notified? What are the timelines? Who's responsible for responding to the initial request and feeding back to the relevant people? And six, will the person raising the appeal be able to speak in person to the board? Or will the issue be dealt with strictly through written submissions? And then finally, what restrictions might there be in place for a meeting? So, for example, would you as a board allow a friend to attend to support the person raising the appeal? What about a union rep? Would you allow a union rep in? What about a lawyer? What would be the basis for your hearing? What's the basis for the decision? What's the basis for the outcome? What role does hearsay play, or an anonymous submission? As has been said many times before, the board and head of school need to have a working relationship that's open, communicative, and trustful. The head of school has a role to play in making sure that there are no surprises by alerting the board to potential issues before they become problematic. And oftentimes the head will be consulting with the board before difficult decisions are made, especially if they relate to issues not completely clarified by policy. Does that mean that the board may then be prejudiced in an appeal? Well, that could be a matter of detail for the lawyers to resolve. The head has a right and a need to consult with the board. That's a role played by the board, and only at a later stage might it become a case for an appeal. In some circumstances, the head may wish to consult with the chair and a particular committee to seek counsel, which then leaves other trustees who weren't involved in the discussions to perhaps listen to the appeal. The bottom line is that appeals can become very emotionally charged, can splinter the community, and if not handled with care, can also create irreparable damage with the relationships between the head of school and the board, and so need to be treated very carefully. And it's not a case of avoidance, but rather ensuring that as many factors are considered in the cold light of day, rather than when under pressure from an impending case. All the documentation has been drafted. Seek legal opinion to ensure that there are no contradictions with local labour laws or general practice in your country. Do that in a time of calm. Are there any aspects of the appeal process that you feel may need to be tightened or documented in your school? What might be the next steps for you now to improve the processes that you have in place?